The Tea House by Bella Pages. In a quiet corner of a small town, down a narrow lane that most people walked past without noticing, there stood a traditional tea house. The building was old, constructed in a style that spoke of another era, with wooden beams and paper screens, a gently sloping roof with curved eaves, and a small garden that surrounded it on 3 sides. Bamboo grew tall along one edge of the garden, its stalks swaying in the slightest breeze. A stone path wound through carefully raked gravel, past a small pond where koi swam in lazy circles. The tea house was owned and operated by a woman named Keiko. She had inherited it from her grandmother 10 years ago, and before that it had been in her family for 3 generations, passed down from tea master to tea master, each one adding their own understanding while preserving the essential traditions. Keiko had spent her childhood in this tea house, learning from her grandmother the careful rituals of tea preparation, the philosophy of presence and simplicity that underlay the practice. But Keiko had not immediately embraced this inheritance. As a young woman, she had rebelled against the tea house and everything it represented. The slow pace, the attention to detail, the emphasis on tradition, all of it had felt stifling to her. She had wanted excitement and novelty, had moved to a large city, had worked in fast-paced corporate environments, had lived a life of constant activity and stimulation. For 15 years, she had stayed away, visiting her grandmother only occasionally, always in a hurry, always with one foot already out the door. She had thought herself happy, thought her modern life superior to the quiet traditions she had left behind. But gradually, year by year, she had felt something shifting inside her. The constant activity that had once felt exciting began to feel exhausting. The novelty that had attracted her revealed itself as superficiality. The success she had achieved felt empty, disconnected from anything meaningful. When her grandmother died and left her the tea house, Keiko had been forced to confront questions she had been avoiding. What did she truly value? What kind of life did she want to live? What would she regret if she continued on her current path? The answers had surprised her. She realized that what she had dismissed as old-fashioned was actually timeless, that the practices she had rejected as irrelevant were precisely what she needed. She had quit her corporate job, had left the city, had returned to the tea house to take up the role her grandmother had prepared her for but which she had refused for so long. The transition had been difficult. She had to relearn skills she had allowed to atrophy, had to cultivate patience she had spent years destroying, had to quiet a mind accustomed to constant stimulation. But slowly, through daily practice, through the discipline of preparing and serving tea with proper attention, she had found her way back to the understanding her grandmother had tried to teach her. Now, 10 years later, Keiko felt that she had finally understood what the tea house was truly about. It was not just a place to drink tea, though the tea served here was carefully selected and properly prepared. It was not just a beautiful space, though the garden and the building were maintained with great care. It was a place of practice, a sanctuary from the rushed and distracted modern world, a space where people could be fully present, where small actions could be performed with complete attention, where simplicity revealed itself as richness rather than lack. This evening, as the sun began to set and the light in the garden took on the golden quality of late afternoon, Keiko moved through the tea house preparing for the evening session. She had 3 guests scheduled, regulars who came weekly for private tea ceremonies. She knew them well, knew their preferences, knew that they came not just for tea, but for the peace and presence that the ceremony provided. She began with the garden, walking its paths with attention, removing any leaves that had fallen, making sure the stones were properly arranged, checking that the bamboo fountain was flowing correctly. The garden was an extension of the tea house, and its condition affected the experience of those who came. Every element was intentional: the placement of stones, the pruning of plants, the raking of gravel in patterns that suggested flowing water. Keiko thought about aesthetics, about how they were not mere decoration but a form of communication, a way of expressing values and inviting particular experiences. The garden's simplicity was not accidental but carefully cultivated, a deliberate choice to remove the unnecessary and allow the essential to emerge. Every plant, every stone, every element served a purpose, created an effect, contributed to the whole. Satisfied with the garden, Keiko returned inside to prepare the tea room itself. She cleaned the tatami mats, arranged the cushions where guests would sit, hung a scroll in the alcove that featured calligraphy expressing a sentiment about the present moment. She checked the hearth where water would be heated, made sure the tea implements were clean and properly positioned, selected the tea bowls she would use from those her grandmother had collected over decades. Each of these actions was performed with attention and care, not rushed, not treated as mere preparation for the real event, but as part of the event itself. Keiko had learned that the tea ceremony began long before guests arrived, that the preparation was as important as the serving, that every moment offered an opportunity for presence and mindfulness. She thought about mindfulness, about how it had become a popular concept in recent years, often reduced to a technique for stress reduction or productivity enhancement. But the mindfulness cultivated through tea ceremony was something deeper, something that could not be separated from the values and philosophy that informed it. It was not a tool for achieving other goals, but a way of being, an orientation toward life that valued presence over productivity, depth over breadth, quality over quantity. The water began to boil, and Keiko adjusted the fire to maintain the proper temperature. The sound of simmering water was called the wind in the pines, and it was considered one of the pleasures of tea ceremony, a natural music that enhanced the atmosphere. Keiko listened to this sound as she continued her preparations, her movements economical and precise, the result of years of practice. Her first guest arrived, an elderly man named Tanaka who had been coming to the tea house since Keiko's grandmother's time. He removed his shoes at the entrance, bowed respectfully, and made his way through the garden to the tea room. Keiko greeted him with a bow and a few quiet words of welcome. He took his place on a cushion, settling into stillness, his face showing the peace that came from this regular practice. The second guest arrived shortly after, a younger woman named Yuki who worked as a nurse in a busy hospital. She came to the tea house weekly to find respite from the constant demands and crises of her work, to remember that there was another way of being besides constant emergency response. She bowed to Keiko and to Tanaka, then took her place beside him, her face still showing traces of the stress she carried from her workday. The third guest was a middle-aged man named Hiroshi, a teacher who had discovered the tea house 5 years ago and had become one of its most devoted practitioners. He arrived last, apologizing quietly for his slight lateness, though he was actually exactly on time. He bowed to everyone and took his place, completing the circle. Keiko waited a moment, allowing everyone to settle, to transition fully from the outside world to this space. Then she began the ceremony, her movements deliberate and graceful, each gesture carrying meaning developed over centuries of practice. She cleansed the implements with precise motions, heated the tea bowl, measured the powdered tea with a bamboo scoop, added hot water and whisked it to the proper consistency. The guests watched in silence, their attention focused on Keiko's actions, on the sound of the whisk against the bowl, on the transformation of powder and water into frothy tea. This watching was not passive but active, a practice of attention that pulled them fully into the present moment, that quieted the constant chatter of their minds. Keiko served the first bowl to Tanaka, placing it before him with a bow. He received it with both hands, lifted it in appreciation, turned it slightly as tradition required, then drank. The tea was slightly bitter but also sweet, complex in flavor, warming as it went down. He drank slowly, savoring it, taking his time, then set the bowl down and bowed in thanks. Keiko prepared the next bowl and served it to Yuki, who received it with the same careful attention. As Yuki drank, Keiko could see the tension beginning to leave her face, her shoulders dropping slightly, her breathing becoming deeper and more regular. This was the tea's work, not just the caffeine and nutrients it contained, but the opportunity it provided for slowing down, for doing one thing completely, for being fully present. The third bowl went to Hiroshi, and then Keiko prepared one for herself. They sat together in the tea room, the four of them, drinking tea and being present with each other and with the moment. Outside, the light was fading from the garden, and the evening was deepening. Inside, the room was lit by paper lamps that cast soft shadows, creating an atmosphere of warmth and intimacy. When the tea was finished, they sat together in silence for a few minutes. This silence was not awkward or empty but full, rich with presence and connection. They were not talking, but they were communicating nonetheless, sharing this space and time, this practice and understanding. Finally, Keiko bowed, signaling the ceremony's end. The guests bowed in return, expressing gratitude not just for the tea but for the space and the practice, for the opportunity to step out of ordinary time and enter a more mindful way of being. They rose and made their way to the entrance, put on their shoes, and departed into the evening, each carrying with them something of the peace they had found here. Keiko remained in the tea room, cleaning the implements, returning everything to its proper place, performing these actions with the same care and attention she had brought to the ceremony itself. She thought about her guests, about what brought them here, about what they found in this simple practice of preparing and drinking tea. They came, she knew, because modern life was difficult in ways that were hard to articulate. The constant stimulation, the endless demands, the fragmentation of attention, the pressure to always be productive, to always be connected, to always be more and do more, all of this took a toll that was not always visible but was deeply felt. People were exhausted, anxious, disconnected from themselves and each other. The tea ceremony offered something different. It was slow and simple, required presence and attention, created space for silence and stillness. It was not productive in any measurable way, did not accomplish anything that could be quantified or monetized. But it was valuable nonetheless, perhaps precisely because it stood in opposition to the values that dominated modern life. Keiko finished cleaning and made her way to her private quarters at the back of the tea house. She lived simply, her rooms containing little furniture, her possessions minimal. This simplicity was not deprivation but liberation, a conscious choice to live with less so that she could focus on what truly mattered. She had learned from her grandmother that clutter in physical space often reflected clutter in mental space, that simplifying one's environment could help simplify one's life. She prepared a simple dinner for herself, rice and vegetables and miso soup, eating slowly and with attention. In the tea tradition, even ordinary meals were opportunities for practice, for bringing mindfulness to basic activities. Keiko ate without distraction, without reading or watching anything, simply eating, tasting the food, feeling grateful for it. After dinner, she sat in her room with a book, one of the classic texts on tea ceremony that her grandmother had studied and that Keiko was now working through herself. The language was old and sometimes difficult, but the wisdom it contained was timeless. Tonight's passage discussed the concept of Wabi-Sabi, the appreciation of imperfection and impermanence, the understanding that beauty could be found in simplicity, in the weathered and worn, in things that showed the marks of time and use. Keiko thought about this concept, about how different it was from the modern pursuit of perfection, of newness, of things that were flawless and permanent. The tea bowls her grandmother had collected were not perfect in any conventional sense. They were handmade, with irregularities and variations. Some had cracks that had been repaired with gold, the repair itself becoming part of the bowl's beauty and history. These imperfections did not diminish the bowl's value but enhanced it, made each one unique, told a story of use and care and continuity. She thought about her own life, about the imperfections and difficulties she had experienced, the mistakes she had made, the wrong turns she had taken. For years, she had tried to hide these imperfections, to present a perfect facade, to be flawless. But she had learned that this was not only impossible but also undesirable, that her imperfections were part of who she was, that accepting them with compassion was wiser than fighting against them. The evening deepened, and Keiko set her book aside. She went to the window and looked out at the garden, now barely visible in the darkness, the bamboo making soft sounds as the night breeze moved through it. The pond reflected what little light remained in the sky, and Keiko could just make out the shapes of koi moving slowly through the water. She thought about continuity, about how this tea house had existed for generations, serving its quiet purpose, maintaining its practices through changing times. Her grandmother had served tea here, and her grandmother's mother before her, and now Keiko carried on this tradition. And someday, if she was fortunate enough to have a student willing to learn, she would pass it on to the next generation. This sense of being part of something larger than herself, of participating in a tradition that extended backward and forward in time, gave Keiko's life a sense of meaning and context that she had not found in her corporate work. There, everything had been about the new, the innovative, the disruptive. The past was dismissed as irrelevant, and tradition was seen as something to be overcome rather than preserved. But Keiko had learned that tradition, properly understood, was not about mindlessly repeating the past, but about preserving and transmitting what had proven valuable over time. The practices of tea ceremony had been refined over centuries, tested by countless practitioners, shaped by generations of masters who had devoted their lives to understanding the way of tea. This accumulated wisdom was not something to be lightly dismissed or casually discarded. Keiko prepared for bed, moving through her evening routine with the same mindful attention she brought to everything. She washed her face, brushed her teeth, changed into sleeping clothes, each action performed completely, not rushed or distracted. This thoroughness in small things was part of the practice, a way of bringing the principles of tea ceremony into everyday life. In bed, she lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of the night. The bamboo continued its soft rustling, a sound she found endlessly soothing. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of traffic from the main road, a reminder that the modern world continued its busy pace beyond her quiet corner. But here, in the tea house, time moved differently, at a pace that honored the natural rhythms of life rather than the artificial urgency of commerce and productivity. Keiko thought about the guests who had come that evening, about the peace she had seen settle over them as they drank tea, about the way their faces had softened, their breathing had deepened, their bodies had relaxed. This was the gift the tea house offered, a temporary refuge from the demands and distractions of modern life, a space where people could remember another way of being, could practice presence and attention, could reconnect with something essential that daily life often obscured. She thought about purpose, about how her purpose had changed over the years. In her youth, she had thought purpose meant achievement, meant making a mark on the world, meant success that others would recognize and admire. She had measured her worth by external standards, job titles, salary, possessions, status. Now she understood purpose differently. Her purpose was to maintain this tea house, to serve tea to those who came seeking it, to preserve and transmit these practices to the next generation. It was not dramatic or impressive by worldly standards. No one would write articles about her or give her awards. But it was meaningful, was necessary, was a genuine contribution to human well-being. Keiko felt her breathing slow and deepen, felt herself drifting towards sleep. Her last conscious thoughts were of gratitude, for her grandmother who had taught her, for the tea house that sheltered her, for the practice that guided her, for the guests who came seeking peace, for the tradition she was honored to serve. And then sleep came, gentle and complete, carrying her into dreams of gardens and tea, of presence and simplicity, of a life lived with attention and care. The tea house stood through the night, its garden peaceful in darkness, its rooms empty but not lifeless, holding the accumulated energy of decades of practice, of countless ceremonies, of all the people who had sat here and drunk tea and found in this simple act something profound and healing. The bamboo swayed in the night breeze, the koi swam slowly through their pond, the gravel in the garden held its raked patterns, everything in its place, everything expressing the principles of harmony and respect, purity and tranquility that were the foundation of the tea way. Hours passed in silence. The night reached its deepest point, when even the distant traffic sounds faded to almost nothing, when the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, gradually, the darkness began to thin. The eastern sky took on the faintest hint of gray, and the garden began to emerge from night, its shapes and forms becoming visible in stages as the light grew. Birds began to wake, their first calls greeting the new day. The koi rose toward the surface of their pond, ready for whatever the day would bring. The bamboo stood tall and straight, its leaves catching the first light. And in her room, Keiko stirred in her sleep, some deep awareness sensing the approaching dawn. She woke naturally, without alarm, her body attuned to the rhythms of light and darkness. For a moment she lay still, feeling rested and peaceful, grateful for the night's sleep and ready for the day ahead. Then she rose and dressed, beginning her morning routine, the first of many small practices that would fill her day. each one an opportunity for presence, for attention, for bringing the principles of tea into ordinary life. She went to the garden first, as she did every morning, walking its paths, checking that all was well, making small adjustments where needed. The morning air was cool and fresh, and the light was beautiful, clear and new. Keiko took a deep breath, filling her lungs, feeling fully awake, fully present, fully alive. She returned inside to prepare morning tea for herself, performing the ritual with the same care and attention she would bring to a formal ceremony. She heated the water, measured the tea, whisked it to the proper consistency, then sat by the window looking out at the garden while she drank. The tea was warming and centering, helping her transition from sleep to waking, preparing her for the day's activities. After breakfast, she would clean the tea house, would prepare for the day's guests, would spend time in study and meditation. She would maintain the garden, would practice calligraphy, would perform all the small tasks that kept the tea house functioning. Each activity would be an opportunity for practice, for bringing mindfulness to action, for living in alignment with the values that the tea ceremony expressed. This was her life now, and she could not imagine living any other way. She had wandered far before finding her way back to this place, this practice, this understanding. But the wandering had been necessary, had given her perspective and appreciation she might not have found otherwise. She had needed to experience the alternative, to try the modern way of constant activity and stimulation, in order to understand the value of what she had left behind. The sun rose higher, its light reaching across the garden, touching the bamboo, illuminating the pond, warming the stones. Keiko finished her tea and set the bowl aside, then sat for a few more minutes in stillness, simply being present, simply breathing, simply allowing this moment to be exactly what it was. This was the essence of tea practice, not to always be rushing towards some future goal, but to be fully present here and now, to find in each moment its own completeness, its own perfection. And then she rose and began her day, moving through the tea house with grace and purpose, maintaining this small sanctuary, serving those who came, preserving and practicing the way of tea. The tea house held her and her practice, as it had held generations before her, as it would hold generations to come, a constant presence in a changing world, a refuge of simplicity and peace, a place where people could remember who they truly were beneath the noise and rush of modern life, a space where tea was not just a beverage but a path, a practice, a way of being fully human.